So give us the lowdown, Kyle.
Sure thing. Yeah, well, so my name is Kyle, and I work for a program called Wild Ontario, which is at the University of Guelph. And at that program, what we do is we travel all over our beautiful province of Ontario, normally when we can travel, and we try to teach people and get people excited about nature. And to do that, we work with a very special group of animals, which actually brings me to my second introduction, because I introduced me, and she's being really funny right now, goofy lady. So I'll just see if we can fit us both in here. There we are. But that is our little lady Artemis. And Artemis is one of the very special birds that we work with. And she is called an American Kestrel. We can talk a little bit more about the American Kestrel in a minute. But the important thing to know about Artemis is that she is a bird of prey. She's a hunting bird, even though she seems kind of small and cute. She is a ferocious hunter, and that's the sort of bird that we work with at our program. And the other thing we should know about, I guess, birds like Artemis and the birds in our program that makes them a bit special is that they are birds which we call non-releasable. So that means that each one of them has a problem or an injury or something like that, which means that they can't survive on their own in the wild. And so we try to give those birds a really good home and to take really good care of them, but also to give them an important job in helping to teach people all about nature and that sort of thing. So it's awesome for her to be able to see you guys today because we have been kind of stuck at home just like a lot of people. And so Artemis has not been able to travel all over our province and visit people like you during the pandemic, which is a little bit sad for her.
Awesome. I actually have a question. Well, I guess Brody and Braden had a question, but I think it ties in nicely with what you kind of just mentioned. And Brody and Braden, who are our buddies down here, wanted to know what the difference between why birds of prey are called birds of prey, because they thought, aren't all birds birds of prey since lots of them eat insects? And what makes a bird of prey specifically?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. And it's actually, I have a little bit of a pet peeve about the word birds of prey, because when a lot of people say birds of prey, what they mean is things like hawks and falcons and eagles and owls, those sort of big, tough, strong hunting birds. But the truth is that all bird of prey means is a bird that hunts for other things. And like you mentioned, there's lots of birds that hunt, like a robin might hunt for worms on your front lawn, or a woodpecker might hunt for bugs in the bark of a tree, or a duck might hunt for fish. Like all kinds of birds hunt for things. So lots and lots of birds really could be called birds of prey. And actually, I did call Artemis a bird of prey in my little introduction to her there, but maybe I should have used an even better word, because lots of birds are birds of prey, but birds like hawks and eagles and owls and falcons, like Artemis here, are an even more special group called raptors. And that's, I think, what people are usually talking about when they say birds of prey. They're usually thinking about the raptors. And raptors are birds which hunt, but they hunt in a very special way. They hunt using their feet. Well, Artemis, even though she's very small, she has kind of big, strong feet for her size and big claws or talons as well. And that's what she uses to catch her prey. So if you imagine a falcon or an owl or an eagle hunting, that's what they do. But a robin or a penguin or a woodpecker hunts with its beak, and so that's definitely not the same. So you're absolutely right that lots and lots of birds are birds of prey because lots of them hunt for bugs or fish or mice or whatever kind of animal they might like, but only some birds are raptors. So that's maybe a better word to use for birds like Artemis.
Nice, good question. They also wanted to know what Artemis eats.
For sure, yeah. So I can tell you a little bit more about Artemis too. I always, we have a nice spiel and everything, but I also want to make sure we're answering whatever questions you guys have. So this can be kind of easy going. But Artemis here, being an American Kestrel, she is our smallest kind of falcon that lives here in Ontario, and she is very much a falcon. So if you think of maybe a falcon that more people know a little bit about, like maybe a peregrine, she's just like a peregrine falcon, but just kind of shrunk down a bit smaller. But she is still very, very fluid. And she would like to hunt for all kinds of small animals, which might include things like mice and voles and other rodents or small furry animals. She would definitely hunt for other birds, like maybe sparrows or even something as big as a robin. I know it's hard to tell because we're on a screen, but a robin is about as big as she is, and she could hunt for that as well. She would hunt for reptiles like snakes and lizards, and she would even hunt for lots of insects as well. Kestrels really like to eat things like grasshoppers or even dragonflies, which they'll catch up in the air when they're flying around. If you've ever seen a dragonfly flying around, they're really fast. So that means that she has to be a speedy little flyer as well. So falcons, they're really built for speed, and Artemis, she is no exception to that. She's a fast little bird for sure.
Beautiful. So how did you get Artemis? How did she come to wild?
For sure. So like I said, our birds, they are all with us because they can't survive in the wild on their own. And that's true for Artemis as well. And sometimes we say that Artemis is with us because she is too cute for her own good. And that's a bit of a weird thing to say, but the reason that we say that is that Artemis, when she was a young bird out in the wild, maybe a chick in her nest or just out of her nest, somebody found her and they thought, well, that bird is so cute, I think she would make a good pet. And they took her home and they tried to keep her as a pet in their house in a little cage, which is not a very nice thing for Artemis. Of course, she should have gotten to live out in the wild and be raised by her parents and learn to be a bird. But instead, she was raised in somebody's house, living in a small cage and not learning to be a bird and to do bird things, but instead learning basically to be a person and to do person things. So she is what we call human imprinted. And that just means that she thinks she's a person like us. And once a bird learns that, they can never unlearn it. That's why it's so important for them to be raised by their parents. So Artemis, for the last 10 years, she has thought that she's a person just like me or just like you. And so she wouldn't know what to do if she were to be released out into the wild. So that's why we have Artemis in our program today.
That's neat. So how old is Artemis and how old would he or she be?
Yeah, so Artemis is about 11 years old right now, which for an American kestrel is pretty old. Birds can live to be all different ages, and usually, although it's not always true, usually the bigger the bird, the longer it can live. So something really big like a bald eagle, it could maybe live to be 50 years old or even older than that. But Artemis here, she'll probably live to be around 15 or 16 years old. So at 11 years old, she's kind of an older lady. She's getting up there a little bit. You can see she's preening a little bit right now. She's cleaning up those feathers on her chest, keeping them all in order, kind of like brushing your hair. It's a pretty cool thing to see Artemis do. It means that she's feeling really comfy. It's her first ever Zoom meeting, so I'm glad that she's feeling nice, relax and clean her feathers. That's great.
Yeah. We had a question from a kiddo who couldn't make it today, and they were asking, would Artemis normally migrate in the wild? And if so, where would he or she go?
Yeah, that's a great question too, because lots of birds, of course, they migrate or they fly south to a nice warm place for the winter. Now, birds like Artemis are kind of funny because they have a bit of a choice. Some of them do migrate. They might fly all the way down south to South America, maybe 4,000 kilometers away from there, which is a very, very long way to fly. But some kestrels don't go anywhere at all. They're so tough, even though they're small, that they can live here all winter long if they choose to. So the answer is not really one way or the other. It's kind of both. Some kestrels migrate, some kestrels don't. It just kind of depends what they choose. But yeah, so you could actually see a kestrel right here near Guelph or right here in southern Ontario all 4 seasons of the year, but you're more likely to see them when it's warmer.
Nice.
He's really going down the preening. It's bath time. Yeah.
How much does Artemis weigh?
She weighs, to actually weighed her just before I came here, she weighs 126 grams today, which is a little bit more than a deck of cards. So not very much at all. She's very, very light. And birds in general are really light because being really light helps you to be a good flyer. So even though she is very small, she's even lighter than we might think she would be. So 126 grams are kind of like holding a deck of cards in your hand, not very heavy at all.
Wow, that's amazing. Brody and Braden, do you have any questions that you want to ask?
It was just the ones that we said. So I'm just going to check to see if there's any that you haven't mentioned yet.
I'm
Okay.
going to interrupt Artemis's preening fest here to give her a big snack. Maybe she'll.
Wow. Oh, look at her claws.
If you give Artemis a bigger piece of food like this, you can see how raptors really use their feet. Because she's going to hold onto that with her foot like a little ice cream cone. That's a big piece of chicken. And she's going to rip it up with her sharp beak as well. So they use their feet and their beak together to work away at their food. And their falcons, they don't seem like they'd be particularly closely related to something like a parrot, but actually they're pretty close cousins of the parrots. And so they use their feet kind of like parrots do to hold their food and to work away at it.
How did the American kestrel get its name?
Oh, that's a really good question. How did the Kestrel get its name? I actually don't know where the word Kestrel comes from. So that's a really, really good question. I'm going to have to go look that one up afterwards because all these years I've never thought about why they're called Kestrels and I've never heard that word anywhere else either. That's a great question, but the answer is I don't know and I'm going to have to go find out later.
Pardon? What was the last part?
He's going to find out later and get back to you.
Yeah, the answer to your question is I just don't know, so I'm going to have to go look that up. It's a great question. I love when people ask me questions I don't know the answer to.
What is your favorite type of bird?
What's my favorite type of bird? That's a really hard question because I love so many birds. I think I really, really do like American kestrels. Artemis is one of my very favorite birds. But I think even a little bit more, I really love vultures, and especially turkey vultures, which are the ones that live around here. They're so cool.
I love turkey vultures too.
They're just the best.
Do you know roughly how many birds are native to Ontario?
Yeah, so it depends a little bit on what we mean by native to Ontario. Birds are a bit tricky because they can fly, of course, so that means sometimes they show up in places they're not supposed to be. So there are about 250 types of birds that actually breed here, that stay here and have their babies in Ontario. But there's about 150 more that kind of show up here sometimes because they fly here from other places. So we could say there's about 250, or I think it's actually maybe a little closer to 280 that breed here and are here all the time. And then there's about 400 in total that could be here if they're kind of moving around and they show up from other places.
Good question, because last week we were talking about plants, and so we looked at the how plants can sometimes be native and how sometimes they can be cultivars or they can come from different areas. And so I think that's where that question came from. But birds are a little bit more tricky because, of course, they can move much faster than plants can.
Yeah, for sure. So if we have a plant that maybe got brought over here from maybe England or something like that, we might consider that plant to be invasive, like it doesn't really belong here. Somebody brought it over and now it lives here. But birds, they can just move around on their own. So sometimes we get a bird that shows up here. Maybe it would normally live in Alberta and it shows up here just because it's flying around and this is where it is. So it's not really invasive. It's just kind of moving around and that's where it is right now. So flying adds a level to it. What's that?
It's just here.
Yeah, it's just here, exactly. And sometimes it'll just come here for like a week and then it'll fly back to Alberta or it'll go somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
How do owls turn their head all the way around?
Oh, that's a really good question. Lots of people want to know about how owls turn their heads so far. And there's a couple of things actually that we have to sort of figure out with that question. The first is, how far can an owl really turn its head? And the answer is that they can't go from like straight forward in a full circle to look straight forward again. That would be too far and they can't quite do it. But what they can do is they can look straight forward and they can turn 3/4 of the way around in one direction. And then they can come back and go 3/4 of the way around another direction, which is really far. I can only go 1/4 of the way to each side. And that's kind of disappointing. But the other thing we need to know about that is that it's not just owls that can do it. Artemis here, she can turn her head about the same as an owl, and most birds can do the same. For some reason, owls just get all the fame for that, even though other birds can do it too. But the way that they can do it is actually by having a really long neck. And it might not look, when you look at Artemis here, or when you look at an owl, it might not look like they have a very long neck, but underneath all those feathers, they have a neck with more than, well, as many as twice as many bones in it as yours. So we've got a neck with 7 vertebrae or 7 bones. An owl has 14 vertebrae or 14 bones in its neck. And actually some birds have as many as 22 bones in their neck. So the more bones you have, kind of the longer your neck is and the more you can turn it around. And so that is how owls do that, and other birds too, just by having long necks hidden under their feathers.
One of my last questions here is what determines the color of a bird's egg?
The color of a bird's eggs? That's a really good question too. So bird's eggs, we often think of eggs as being white or maybe brown because the chicken eggs we buy in the store are often white or brown. But actually in nature, bird eggs are all different colors. Some of them are blue or turquoise, some of them are pink, some of them have spots or blotches of all different colors on them. And there's a few different things that decide. The main thing is all about camouflage. So it kind of depends where a bird nests. A bird like Artemis here, she's what we call a cavity nester. And that means that she would build her nest in a hole, like maybe an old woodpecker hole in a tree. And so her eggs, they would actually be white because in the cavity, they're already hidden. So they don't have to camouflage or hide anymore. They can just be white, and that's fine. But a bird like maybe a killdeer, which is a bird that runs around on the ground and lays its eggs right on the ground in the middle of a field, has beautiful eggs that are brown and dappled with other shades of brown and gray, because it helps to really blend them in the field so that other animals who might want to eat the eggs can't find them. So usually it has to do with camouflage and with hiding those eggs so that other animals don't eat them.
Good questions, guys. Way to go.
And then, how do you attract blue jays to your backyard?
Oh, good question too. I love blue jays. You know, a lot of people I feel like kind of get upset at blue jays because at their bird feeders, sometimes they can be a little bit of a bully.
Yeah.
But I like when they come around, and the favorite food of a blue jay in the backyard is peanuts. So if you have a bird feeder that maybe has different seeds in it, they'll come and eat the seeds sometimes, but if you put out a bird feeder that has peanuts in the shell, they love those. And you can actually get bird feeders that are specially made to hold peanuts, and blue jays just think they're the greatest thing in the world. So definitely, if you want to attract blue jays, I would try some peanuts. I understand too, because I love peanuts.
Those are great questions, guys. So one other question from a kiddo who's not with us today. They wanted to know what other types of critters or creatures or birds that you guys have, and if you guys if they all live together, like in a house, or if they all live in separate houses.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have right now in our program 16 birds in total, and they're all raptors. So they're all hunting birds with sort of big, strong feet, and that includes, in our case, falcons like Artemis, as well as some hawks and owls too. If you want to see which birds we have in our program, you could actually go to our website, wildontario.ca, and there's lots of pictures of all the different birds on there. You can check them out. And they do not live together. So all of our birds, each one has its own home and it lives by itself. And that may seem a little sad from a human perspective because people, we're kind of social. We like to hang out with friends or family, but raptors, they like to be by themselves. That's the way they like it. And so that's the way we keep them too. And it's also much safer that way, because you can imagine if we were to put maybe a little falcon like Artemis in a place with a big falcon, that can be pretty dangerous to her because that big falcon might see her as lunch. So all of our birds, they live by themselves, and that's how they like it. But we make sure to come in every day and we work with them and we train them. We take them for walks. We make toys for them sometimes, or little food puzzles. We try to make sure that we're keeping them nice and happy and healthy, even though they live by themselves.
Nice. And I think the last question that one of our kiddos had was, how are these birds different, or are they more similar to the birds that, I think the question is, are these the same kind of birds that carry supplies like what they see in the movie? So he's referencing a movie and okay. like a carrier falcon or something. Is this the same type of bird that would do something like that?
Cool, that's a good question. Yeah, so at different times through history, people have used birds to carry things, usually very small things like little notes or messages. And the bird that people have used a lot for that, believe it or not, is pigeons. Now pigeons, they're not the smartest bird out there, but what they are really good at is going home. So if you keep pigeons, let's say maybe you're a pigeon person and you have some pet pigeons in your backyard. If you take that pigeon and you drive it 500 kilometers away and you let it go, that pigeon will find its way back home. And so that's how carrier pigeons worked. People would take their pigeons from maybe, let's say, a castle in medieval times. They'd take the pigeon from the castle where it lives to another castle. And when the people of that other castle wanted to send a message, they would tie a little message to that pigeon's leg, and they would let it go, and it would go back to its home castle. And so that way they were able to use those pigeons to send messages. I don't know about people using raptors to send messages. Now, we did see it in Harry Potter. So if you're a Harry Potter fan, you've seen owls delivering the mail. And that works very, very well, definitely in the magical world. But here in the non-magical world, owls not quite smart enough probably to be good mail deliverers. So I wouldn't expect to see that maybe anytime soon. So I don't know about raptors being used. You maybe could train a bird like Artemis to do it over a short distance. I'm not really sure, but the ones that are most famous for delivering messages definitely are pigeons.
Beautiful. So we've our group, Kyle, we are urban eco explorers. So what we do is we look at our backyards and our front yards and spaces that are really close to our home. And that's kind of what we're discovering and looking at right now. So just to finish off, could you give us one suggestion, perhaps, on how we as urban eco explorers could help a bird like Artemis in our backyard?
For sure. Well, so for kestrels like Artemis, they are a bird that you can definitely see right in the city. I've seen them right here in the city of Guelph. Their favorite place to be is out in the country. So if you were to take a drive out of the city to where there's some nice big farm fields, that's the kind of place that birds like Artemis really like to be. And kestrels are kind of interesting because they are maybe disappearing a little bit. We don't have quite as many kestrels as we used to have, and nobody quite knows why. There's a big project happening in the United States called the American Kestrel Partnership, and they're trying to figure out why these guys are in big trouble. And people can, if they want, put up nest boxes for them to help give them a place to nest. That's kind of a bigger thing to do. It's a little bit trickier. But there are lots of birds that live in our cities. There's actually a slightly bigger falcon than Artemis called a Merlin, and they live right downtown here in Guelph. They live in some of our bigger parks, so you can actually see little falcons like this without even leaving the city. And really the best thing to do for any of our birds, I think, is to give them a place to live. So they need habitat, and for a lot of our birds, that can be as simple as planting trees. Maybe you can plant some trees and shrubs in your backyard. You can put up bird feeders. That's a really cool thing to do as well. And that way you get to watch those birds, which is lots of fun. And I always say, especially for small birds like Artemis, keeping cats indoors or on a leash is a really good thing as well, because cats can be very, very dangerous to birds like her. So keeping our cats inside and helping to teach other people how important it is to keep cats inside or outside on a leash, that's okay too, is a great thing we can do to help these guys as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for answering all of our questions. We are so happy to be able to meet you and to meet Artemis and learn more about what you guys do and how we can keep birds like her safe. And thank you so much for answering all our questions. So I think we're all done because all of our questions are done. And yeah, thanks so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me, guys. It was lots of fun. And if you think of any other questions, you can always fire me an email. I'd be happy to answer them that way as well.
Beauty. Thanks so much. All right, we're signing off, Brody and Braden. We'll talk to you later.
All right, guys. Have a good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Bye, you.